Hey, good morning, everyone. Let's begin. Any questions that you have from yesterday? Anything you didn't understand? Anything that you want to talk about? Okay, so let's begin. Yesterday we were talking about how he is, trying to draw parallels between hypertext and game theory. So today his objective is to draw parallels between hypertextuality and, I'm sorry, hypertextuality and cinema theory, right? So yeah, that's what we're looking for. It's the same story again. So I've just put the conclusion in the beginning that hypermedia and cinema are opposed. Only single person hypercinema has close parallels with hypertext. So we'll come to what hypercinema is and we'll come to what hypermedia is. But first of all, the conclusion here between cinema theory and hypertextuality says that there are some parallels which might be present between how we create cinema today and hypertextuality. But apart from that, there is actually nothing which is which parallels any or the, apart from that there are no similarities between hypertextuality and between cinema theory. So again, like with game theory, he's going to argue that cinema theory is being studied separately and we can't, even though hypermedia and hypercinema and all these terms that he's going to use, basically computer aided cinematic technology has a lot to offer us in the field of hypertext. It really does not create any new insights for us to study hypertextuality. So even if there are some similarities between cinema and hypertext or between interactive media and hypertext, at the end he's just going to conclude that both of them should stay separate. The one important distinction that he's going to make in this section is about the audience. Right. So whether audience is interactive or whether audience is multiple. This is the point here as well, whether audience is interactive or whether audience is multiple. So in an interactive audience, what will happen is the audience will decide the path, where do you want to go, which path do you want to take, which choice do you want to make, right? But in multiplied cinema, the film is directed at a group of passive audience members. So, for example, when you go to a theater to watch a film, you're not sitting there deciding, what Salman Khan is going to do or what Aishwarya is going to do. You don't get to decide that. It's already pre-decided, it's pre-formed, pre-cut, and it's just fed to you. So, what are we in those instances? We are a passive audience, a passive multiple audience. But if the interaction between a cinematic product and an audience member is interactive, then that audience will probably be singular, right? Because more than one or two people cannot interact with a cinematic product directly. Now, everybody will need their own devices, everybody will need their own, what do you say? Everybody will need their own point of contact with that interactive cinematic product, right? So if you have, for example, again we go back to the Netflix example of Bandersnatch, and if you're watching Bandersnatch, then what you're in fact doing is interacting with it on a one-on-one basis. It is playing in front of you, you're sitting there, you're interacting with it, right? So interactive audiences are active, but they're also singular. Whereas on the other hand, if I'm watching some other film on Netflix, then I'm just a passive audience. Even then, I can be single. I can watch it singly. Nobody needs to be there for me. But the key point is that it is a passive audience. We'll come to these, denotations in sometimes. So these are the two things that you have to remember. The first 2 points of this section, the only 2 points that the section is trying to make. Otherwise, it has a lot of examples. It's very long, around 10 pages, but it has a lot of examples that you can look up. I've included some URLs at places where I could find something about the narrative, but most of these examples are really old now and they cannot be played on Chrome anymore because the Flash player doesn't work. So if you figure out a way to make the Flash player work, you can definitely go and watch all the movies and cinema when you have time. Right. And by movies, I don't mean 3 hour long movies. The maximum that these things, the maximum length of these things is just 15, 20 minutes. The first is hypermedia and cinema are opposed. Only single person hypercinema has close parallels with hypertext. Just remember this confusion, will come back to it at the end. Second thing is the audience is active and one in hypertext, interactive hypermedia, and DVD. So what is it? In hypertextuality, we've learned that whether you're watching Patchwork Girl or whether you're interacting with Subway Story, you are one person, one-on-one interaction with hypertext. So you are not only active, but you're also singular in the case of a hypertext. If I say one, I just don't mean only one person can interact. Obviously, even a friend can do it, but more than one, two, three, more than three people will include a problem with the choices that you're going to make. So when I say one, I don't literally mean one. I just mean a very small number of people. Right. Then you have interactive hypermedia. So what is interactive hypermedia? So hypertext is text, which is interactive. Hypermedia is the creation of videos, the creation of interactive games. So games and videos, which are obviously, so the key point here for hypermedia is that it needs to be video based, not so much text based. But the other parallels apply, that it needs to be based on the process of hyperlinks. It needs to have multiple choices, multiple branches. It needs to have a tree-like structure or rhizomatic structure. So all of that applies. That's the only difference. So when it's not textual, when it's video based or just image based, we can call that piece of work hypermedia. Right. Then we have DVD. So why am I giving the example of DVD here? Because when you were talking about multiple cinemas, I quoted the example of Netflix when I said that I could be watching any movie alone also. So the example of DVD and other OTT platforms that we have today, because remember again this book is written in 2006. At that point, you were all watching DVDs and VCDs. Nobody had Netflix here in India. So with DVD, along with that, you can also remember OTT platforms. So all of these platforms are engaged in showing us cinematic things, but we experience those products passively. So you watch a series, but you don't have any say in how or what those characters are going to do. Or you watch it again, you watch it again, you watch it again. Even if you watch it multiple times, you cannot change the way the characters are doing anything. Why? Because those products are meant for passive consumption. We are the passive consumers of those products. We can't change anything in those products. Right. So through DVDs, through hypertextuality, through interactive media, you can gain an audience of one. But for cinema, you have a passive and a plural audience. Right. Remember that DVD के case में भी you have a passive audience. I just put that here because we're talking about singular audiences, right? So active audiences in the case of hypertext and obviously interactive media. DVD के case में not an active audience but still a singular audience. In the case of passive and plural audiences, the first example that comes to mind is cinema. Whenever you go to watch a film, you're always watching it. There are a lot of people watching it with you. It's a group experience, and plus it's a passive experience. You might throw popcorn at the screen, or you might clap or hoot, or stand up and sing the national anthem with the people who are in the movie, but you will not be able to change anything. There is no interaction. You can't make those characters hear what you're trying to say. Okay. After I've explained this point, any problems that you have in the audience part, because this is going to follow us throughout the rest of the section, and I want it to be very clear. Okay, so we'll move on. Third point is convergence between traditional cinema and hypertext. Now, what is this? Let's find out. Okay, so what is traditional cinema? Remember again the passive plural cinema. That's what we're talking about here. But we're talking about the cinema which uses a lot of computer technology. So he's talking about cinema which we see today, right? So uske andar he says that kind of traditional cinema and hypertext have some convergences. Basically, the single most convergence that they have is in the term of computer technology. Both of them use a lot of computer and digital technology, and they use it somewhat in the same way. This is his one point of convergence that he divides into three separate points. So he says the computer technology is used in cinema editing, cinema making. Obviously, everything that you see in cinema today is shot on cameras, which are digital cameras. Right? Remember, there are no analog cameras. So analog cameras, if you like twist them, the old Satyajit Ray kind of cameras, they don't exist anymore. So you have digital camera recordings, which are then put on computers, which are edited extensively in terms of their background, in terms of how the characters look, and then the final product reaches. So computer technology is used in cinema editing and making, and it is similar to the digital technology used for hypertext. So what is happening in hypertext? You have text which is being put into Lexia, which is being torn up, sections of it put elsewhere. There are characters just spinning around the character with more words coming out of their mouth. So you have all of this digital technology. Hypertext is possible because of the digital revolution, right? This is something that we've taken as a given from our first lecture, but this is he combines this point with cinema theory, how cinema and hypertextuality both use computer and digital technology today. Computer manipulated images are both used. So cinema के अंदर when you have some very difficult stunts, so computer manipulated images, they erase the wires or the ropes which are holding the actor or the stuntman in position, right? So to give the illusion that these actors are actually flying through air or something. Right. You've all seen Endgame, you've all seen Superman and all those superhero movies. So what happens here is you have a lot of high quality stunts being performed by people, and we believe them because they have been edited. Believe them to some degree. Obviously, we know they've been edited, but how are they edited? Through computer manipulated images. And similarly, in hypertext, you have fused images. Go back to our discussion in the first and the second lecture when I showed you examples. So I showed you posters, I showed you images where images are superimposed on images to create a new picture. And how are those pictures created? Obviously, through computer manipulation. So computer technology is universally used in both. This is the single point of conversion that he can find between traditional cinema and hypertext. And now, after he's made this point, he's going to leave this point. And then he's going to tell you about how computer technology has affected cinema in many ways. Right. Computer technology has affected cinema in many ways. Okay, now he's going back into cinema theory and he's going to say that it has given rise to two different kinds of cinematic experiences. The first experience that he's going to talk about is hypertext cinema. Now, what is hypertext cinema? Hypertext cinema के बारे में he says कि this is cinema that permits the audience to choose narrative, but it is difficult to imagine more than one or two people making these choices. Right, and he's going to give you a lot of examples. Let's spend a minute trying to understand what this is. So hypertext is cinema which is based on interaction. When I use the word here, interactive hypermedia, okay, so hypertext cinema is a part of interactive hypermedia. How? Because it is hypertextual. If it's hypertextual, it's going to be interactive. At the same time, because it's cinema, therefore it is going to be video based. An interactive hypermedia, I said, was any kind of hypertextual form or any kind of hyper form which used hyperlinks, but use the format of hyperlinks, but in a video-based way. So hypertext cinema, he says, is a particular form of cinema which includes the branched out structure, which includes a tree-like structure, and it permits the audience to choose narratives, but it is difficult to imagine more than one or two people making those narratives because hypertext cinema requires the use of multiple devices, multiple endpoints. So I will need to have my own device for my interaction. You will require your own device, and everybody will require access to the cinematic product individually to be able to interact with the cinematic product, which is very difficult to do. When you think of cinema, you think of masses. You don't really think of you don't really think of singular interaction. It is only now with OTT platforms that we can imagine singular interaction, and we can also imagine a singular passivity. Like you can sit and watch a Shah Rukh Khan movie. You can also sit and interact with Bandersnatch at the same time, singularly. But that is a development which wasn't there in 2006. So he doesn't really discuss it. If you want to bring a kind of edge to your answers, you could always include the dynamic as well, but I've not included it here because it's not in your text. Right. You're going to give three examples here. We're going to discuss a couple of them. So the first example is Janet Murray's MIT French language teaching project. Then Nitin Thani and David Balcom and Ian Smith from the University of Georgia, they've come up with HyperCafe, which is what I want to talk about. So HyperCafe is an interactive video. In any way you see it, this interactive video is around 12 to 18 minutes long. Right. It combines digital video and hypertext, and it extends the rhetoric of hypermedia. Right, so it combines digital video and hypertext, which I again said was the definition of interactive hypermedia or hypertext. It extends the rhetoric of hypermedia. The video here plays constantly. You can't choose the direction of what is being played, and it cannot be shut off. So you have a 10-second window to decide which option to take, just like in Bandersnatch. So you have a 10-second option to decide which to take, but then that video, whatever video you've decided, is going to play on. You can't pause it, you can't shut it, you can't close it. Right. So whatever choice you have is it's very dire in that way that it's not going to reverse itself. Right. Spatial linking through potential interface modes and themes, textual links through the text that intrudes on things. So there are three types of links here, which is this is the important part, which is why we're discussing Hypercafe, because he includes this in some detail. So he says that there is not only temporal linking. So temporal linking is what the links that we've been discussing. You have two choices in time, like you're sitting here and at this point you have two choices. So you decide to take the left one. This is temporal linking. Then again, you have two choices. You again decide to take the left one. Again, temporally. So you're moving through time. You're moving in a linear direction through time, and you're making your choices along the way. That is temporal linking. The second type of linking is through spatial modes. So what happens in Hypercafe is that you have objects all around you. So you might have a coffee cup, you might have a picture of somebody, you might have a poster somewhere. So these objects, glow with some kind of light. So you know that they have their stories to share. This is also a very common thing in if you ever play video games. This happens. Where you have all these secret objects scattered all over the space or the story world or the game world, and you click these objects for special themes, or you click these objects to enter hidden dimensions, which is something that we were discussing yesterday also. But spatial linking here is through potential interface modes. These potential interface modes are these objects or themes which you can click on and enter into another, maybe a short video or maybe some kind of narrative will come out and play itself. Because remember, this is hyperactive, sorry, this is the hypermedia, which is interactive, it's not a game, right? And textual links. So this is an interesting point which happens in Hypercafe, that it not only uses video, but also includes text. So textual links to a text keeps on intruding through the screen. If you ever watched a foreign language movie and if you ever turn on the subtitle, it's a very jarring experience to watch something and then also to pay attention to the subtitles. Which is why personally I can't watch movies with subtitles. I would rather not watch foreign movies than watch them with subtitles, because you either can concentrate on the text or you either can concentrate on video. So it's a very disturbing experience in some ways. So this is what Nitin Sani and his team they capitalize on in Hypercafe, that they put in these texts throughout the video. So sometimes they might combine two links also. So they might combine the spatial link, they might combine the textual link. But through these three kinds of linkings, basically, what they create is a very good interactive hypermedia. This is his point. Greg wrote The Wrong Side of Town. You're free to read up on this, but there's not a lot. Then you have another interactive hypermedia, which is almost like a game, right? It's called Bad Day at the Midway. It's a CD-ROM interactive video. There's a complete playlist of this available online on YouTube. So I've copied the link here. I don't know why this is not blue and glowing like other links. So you can copy this and use it, or you can just search for this on YouTube and you'll find it. There are complete playlists, hour-long playlists of how this game was. So now what happens? Bad Day and the Midway is that you are a boy called Timmy, and you enter this space. It's like a carnival, and you enter it, and you interact with various characters there, and with every character you have the option to change your position. You're going to stay Timmy, you're going to stay the boy, like the boy, but with every character you can change positions every time you play it, or every time you watch it. You can follow a different character, you can follow their own story, follow that character's story. So there are 6 7 adult characters that you can follow, and YouTube have all of them, so you're free to go crazy and watch. So hypertext cinema is this. Again, hypertext cinema, the two essential things for hypertext cinema is that it needs to be hypertextual in the sense that it needs to have a branching, multilinear, multidirectional, rhizomatic structure. And the second thing is that it needs to be cinematic, that it needs to be video based. It might have other things, but these are the two essential things in hypertext cinema. It needs to be interactive, it needs to be hypertextual, and it needs to be cinematic. The second type that we come to here is the randomized or multiple cinema. So now what is randomized or multiple cinema? Here the film is divided into discrete sections, but unlike hypertextuality, the computer is now going to decide which path you will follow. Again, this is a very illuminating point because we know that hypertextuality involves a lot of interaction. We are very clear on this point that randomized or multiple cinema, when the computer is deciding this for you, we cannot call this a hypertextual video. Why? Because you, as readers or listeners or viewers of that content, are not interacting with the content. Right. So because there's no interaction, this cannot be called hypertextual. This is why he calls it randomized or multiple cinema. Randomized, why? Because the computer is making this random selection. Multiple, why? Because it is joining these fragments together. A good example of this here is Ian Flittman's Hackney Girl. So this is the link that you can follow, and it allows you to play it, but we can't play it because in most browsers they've disabled Flash Player. So if you can find a way out, please let me know also. So Ian Flittman made Hackney Girl. He's a professor now at some university. He made a lot of other digital videos as well if you want to look them up. So this is a love story in the form of video diary of a girl or of a girl and her friend. So it's unclear, and I'll tell you why it's unclear. So it's a girl and or her friend, one people or two people who moved from London to Istanbul in 2002, and it involves other things. It involves cats. It involves other people. It involves different locations, different settings. What happens when you click on this is that the computer is going to edit these small fragments itself. So you might have, say, 100 or 150 fragments, and this video also comes out to be maximum 18 minutes. So 18 minutes. So there are going to be a lot of fragments. The computer is going to shuffle them together. Every time you watch it, it is going to be a new order. But you can't select that order. Unlike hypertextuality, there is no interaction. So again, we are a passive audience. Even though the effect is to create random, to create arbitrariness, to create randomness, but that randomness is not in our hands. We are not the creators. However, he is going to see, Lando is going to argue that even if we are not the creators of this narrative, we do create the coherence and unity required to understand that narrative. And let me explain how. So, in the case of Hackney Girl, Hackney is a neighborhood in London, and this girl is from London, so she's shifting to Istanbul. And now you have all these fragments, different fragments that the computer is playing for. When it's playing one fragment after another, you're trying to see that, oh, okay, who are the common characters? What is the common setting? You're trying to create meaning out of this, right? We've understood that in our gestalt psychology discussion also. When I showed you those different symbols and I told you, okay, do you understand what he's trying to say? And everybody could come up with the correct meaning or the correct iteration of those symbols. How? Because I said that even if our brains receive things in fragments, we ourselves create meaning out of it. We ourselves create meaning somehow. So this is what happens in Hackney Girl. Even though you witness or even though you watch the entire movie in fragments, you are still able to come up with a coherent, unified meaning. Right. This is what happened to Landau when he watched it. And I'm sure if we could find a version of the film, we would also do it. So just imagine, watching a very confusing film, or imagine watching a thriller or something. So you keep all those characters in your head. You keep these random bits of information through your head in that 3 hour or 2 hour movie, and you carry it from the beginning to the end so that you can understand whatever meaning is being created. And sometimes movies only show symbols, right? So we have the ability to create meaning from those symbols. That's how our brains work. They're always looking for organization, always looking for unity, and randomized or multiple cinema exploits this capacity. Yeah, the other example is Diego Bonilla's A Space of Time and Stream of Consciousness. Not very good examples. Just concentrate on Hackney Girl if you have to. A randomization creates a mosaic narrative than an orthodox one. Mosaics are what you have those small tile pieces and you create a picture out of them, more like a jigsaw. So they have mosaic. Randomized or multiple cinema creates a mosaic narrative rather than an orthodox one. So orthodox narrative is something which would be given to you. Like this is the order of events. This is how you have to watch these events. So Yeah, that is something that is given to you. But in this case, it's not given to you. It demonstrates that users can construct a coherent narrative from small chunks given to them in varying orders. So I have two exercises for you. Imagine if you ever overheard somebody talking about something. If you're on a bus or a common public mode of travel and you hear two or three people talking. So if you ever just try to overhear what they're saying, what are you trying to do? You're trying to create a coherent picture of what these people are talking about through random pieces of information that you hear. Right? You're trying to fill in the gaps. You're trying to look for clues, and always we end up with some kind of coherent meaning. Right. And another exercise is I have here is to just imagine, try, because we can't watch Ian Flippin Hackney Girl. So just try to imagine a movie that you really like and try to imagine it backwards, like, in some kind of random sequence. So if I have to do it, I try to do it. And I thought about DDLJ, so Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, right? And if you just imagine that movie backwards, it's very weird because then that movie would be that a guy pushes a girl out of a train, and then the girl gets really angry and she becomes very obsessed with the guy and she follows him to Europe. Okay, and she follows him everywhere in Europe. And after following him in Europe, the guy also gets really angry, and in revenge, he steals beer from the girl's father. So that would be the backward narrative, and just by changing the linearity of events that happened in DDLJ, I have turned it from one of the most romantic movies and one of the longest running movies in this country to a very weird movie built on obsession and anger and random things. Right. So try doing that with a favorite movie that you have, and you'll see what I mean here. So whenever we interrupt linearity, it does not mean that discontinuity or fragmentation is going to impede or impair your capacity to create coherent narratives. Right? It's going to work out. You're going to understand what the author is trying to tell you. So the conclusion for this section is that film theory does not have much in common with hypertextual theory, except for the point that both of them are concerned with dramatic changes of direction after a cut. So the only point of convergence that they have here is the dramatic changes in direction. Okay, dramatic changes in direction. How that both film theory and hypertextuality keep you on your toes. So if you have, I'm not talking about traditional film theory here. I'm talking about hypermedia. So if you have interactive hypermedia, it needs an active and responsive reader. Okay, and if you have a hypertextual example, it also needs a very active reader because both of them are meant to somehow jar us, disturb our passivity. You just can't sit back and relax and then say, okay, I'm going to read a hypertextual media. It doesn't work like that. It's not a book which you can go from point A to point Z. It does not work like that. So therefore, both of them have dramatic changes of direction after a cut, in the sense that they have authorial ways in which they disturb us, disturb our passivity as readers. Important point here, segments, fragments, discontinuity, and gaps do not destroy a narrative but are crucial to it. The splicing of two separate shots represents a creation. It is a creation. So then it's simply not one plus one. So if I have one shot and if I have another shot and I'm putting these two together, it represents a creation. This is how movies are created, right? So you have shorts, short shorts, and then they're put together in a computer, right? And we all know that a movie is not shot in the way that it appears in front of us, right? So maybe the first scene was the last scene to be shot, or maybe it was the middle scene to be shot. So a movie is in fact what? A different bunch of videos edited together. Now when they edit it together, it does not mean that they added so many number of shots or they added so many number of videos together to create a movie. The final thing is that we create a movie. We use the word creation. We use the verb creation to signify that something is brought into existence, right? So this is the act of patching together segments, and everything is called an act of creation. It's not simply 1 plus 1 equals to 2, or we combine 100 shots together. It's not like that. It is proof that the human need for order underlies perception through aggregation. Aggregation is what? Collection, commingling, linking things together. So we always will, go towards order by linking the things that we know about other people, okay, or about cinema, about a cinematic product, or about hypertextuality. The next point is that the spectator is drawn into the creative act. Again, this is another fancy way of saying that the reader is also an author. So remember our reader-author comments. The readers are not readers, they're also authors. So the spectator is drawn into a creative activity and his individuality is opened up rather than subordinated by the author. So it is not that the reader's individuality goes away. It is because of the reader's individuality that he can interact with the text in a very specific way. It is because I, as a person, am very different from you as a person, which is why when given a hypertextual medium to interact with, we will go through it in our own separate ways. Right. So the spectator is drawn into the creative act. He creates because he is not only a spectator, he's also a viewer. Just like a reader of hypertext is not only a reader but also an author. His individuality is opened up rather than subordinated, and therefore readerly individuality fuses with authorial intention. So a reader is an author, a viewer, a spectator is also a viewer, a spectator is also a director. The audience therefore performs the text. Again, we discussed this point yesterday as one of the significant differences between print media and games and hypermedia. That games and hypermedia are always meant to be performed, and they're meant to be performed multiple times. But print media is not. You can read a book multiple times, but it's not meant to be that. Right. So here again, we come to the same point. The audience is going to perform text. Thus, whenever readers encounter fragments and discontinuity, they will nonetheless try to perceive order, coherence, and continuity. The same point again, it just sounded better this was already. That readers will always try to organize their thoughts, they should always try to extract some kind of unity from disunity, no matter how disjointed or fragmented these products are. Right, so this is all we're going to do today. And we have one section left which we're going to complete soon. We have 2 days to do it, which is the concluding section. We want to spend some time on it. So I'll give it one entire class. If you have any questions till this point, please ask me. Any comments to make? Any questions that you have? Anything you didn't understand today? Anything you want me to go over again?
Excuse me.
Huh?
Could we say that we have traveled enough journey in this field that we can say ourselves as performer rather than leaders?
I'm sorry, could we say that we are what?
We have become performers rather than leaders in this field.
Definitely, definitely, because we are performing it now. Whenever you interact with something, you enter that performance. This is the point that he's trying to make. Whether it's an interactive game, whether it's an interactive movie, whether it's an interactive text, we are always performing. So the author is performing for us, and we are joining in that performance. So definitely, we are performers. But at the same time, we're also recipients of the content. We're not complete authors, we're not the complete the original creators of that content. So we're just interacting with it. We can definitely call ourselves performers, but it's not that we will not call ourselves readers or viewers or spectators. We have to have both categories.
Well, could this be going to change a drastic change in our conventional use of terms like reader or other?
Definitely, definitely. So you had the readerly notion and you had the writerly notion. When we started this lecture, I talked about Roland Barthes' readerly text and the writerly text, and those conceptions are coming out in the 1960s, 1970s, the 1980s. Now, 30, 40 years later, readers are very different. Just because of the addition of OTT platforms, his entire point, Landau's entire point about cinemas and audience has completely changed. Right. So with further advancements in theory, yes, definitely, it is going to change. And we can't use those terms innocently. Anything else, anyone? Okay, so fairly simple lecture today, it seems. Or I don't know if you're listening or not, but hopefully.